Story 1. My C-section incision ripped fully open. My insides attempted to become outsides, and some were successful. Story 2. Kidney stone. It was so small that when it reached my bladder, it dissolved. However, the pain felt like having nails hammered into my lower back. Story 3. When I was little, I took apart a PlayStation to see if it would run without the case. I forgot to unplug it before I grabbed the motherboard. Due to the current, I was unable to let go for a solid 4 seconds. Story 4. A doctor tried unsuccessfully to pull my partially detached big toenail the rest of the way off with pliers. Story 5. I remember one episode of a migraine attack that felt overwhelmingly intense. The pain was like an incessant, pounding pressure, as if someone were squeezing my head tightly from all sides. Even soft sounds and dim lights became unbearable, making it feel like my entire world was closed off in a haze of pain. That experience, though thankfully rare, made me appreciate the moments when I can live pain-free. Story 6. Gallbladder with stones. I started having attacks when I was in high school, but I thought it was just because I ate something bad. I let it get to the point where I was only sleeping 3 hours a night, and I started turning yellow in my skin and eyes. I couldn't take the pain anymore. I'm the type of person who usually walks it off until it goes away. But I was on the floor, unable to do anything. So I went to the hospital and they asked why I didn't come sooner. I had my gallbladder removed, but the pain I experienced was something I wouldn't wish on my worst enemy. Trust me, it's no fun. Story 7. Prior to realizing I had Sjogren's syndrome, I started losing tooth enamel quickly, leading to the extraction of all my teeth. The oral surgeon could not see me for a month before the procedure and advised me to continue taking my blood thinner, assuring me he would manage any bleeding. A couple of days before the extractions, the pain became so unbearable that I could only walk in circles, waiting for the next dose of acetaminophen and Oragel to take effect. When I arrived at the oral surgeon's office, they conducted more x-rays and revealed that I had 9 exposed nerves in my mouth. He mentioned that the pain from the extractions would be a relief from the existing pain, and he was right. I experienced prolonged bleeding through gauze and a mouth full of stitches for 2 days due to the blood thinners. One of the pain scales indicated that severe pain could be nearly disabling, which was true for me. Spending that time walking in circles, unable to speak or think about anything other than the pain, was overwhelming. It was a relief when everything was finally removed. Story 8. I had a loop electrosurgical excision procedure done. They used a cauterizing loop to cut out part of my cervix to remove cancerous cells. They gave me 1 Valium and a local anesthetic, saying, "If you feel anything, just let us know." It hurt so much, and my mind was so foggy that I couldn't figure out how to express myself. I endured confused agony until they were finished. Years later, I had scar tissue from the procedure and was going into labor. The doctor decided to break it up by hand because it was easier than surgery. Now, I have significant anxiety about going to the doctor. Story 9. I've broken ribs, hands, wrists, arms, and toes, but all of that is child's play compared to 2 herniated discs with sciatica. You know how you sometimes wake up with a Charlie horse, experiencing an exquisite level of pain? The sciatica caused a Charlie horse in my right calf that lasted 7 months. And yes, it remained at that same level of pain the entire time. It was life-changing. After about 7 months, I began to regain feeling in the toes of my right foot, and things slowly started to improve. However, it took a few more months for everything to mostly return to normal. Story 10. Toes were squeezed while I was at work. Then, the boots were slowly pulled off without any medication. Parts of my toes were removed with the boots. Story 11. Kidney stones are incredibly painful. The discomfort can feel overwhelming, making even the thought of relief seem impossible. I found myself resting on the couch, contemplating my life and wondering if I had everything in order. Story 12. Getting spacers placed between some of my teeth made me sweat and arch off the dentist chair in serious pain. Plus, the expander for all my upper teeth was excruciating. Every time my parents turned the key for the expander, it felt like hell. Story 13. I have given birth twice, but nothing compares to the massively painful tooth that needed a root canal. There is nothing like dental pain, and this was on another level. My blood pressure was so high before the procedure that it startled the endodontist, but he mentioned he often sees this with extreme pain. Story 14. I cut the tip of my finger off with a mandolin slicer. But wait, that's not the worst part. I cleaned it up and put gauze on it a couple of times. The last time I did this was in the morning. When I went to clean and change the gauze that night, it had healed to my finger. I figured I'd better get it off so I could clean it. I gave it the old 1, 2, 3 yank because I thought that would be better than picking at it. Next thing I knew, I was squatting on the floor with my arms stretched up in the air, hanging onto the sink, and my fingertip was dripping blood like a leaky faucet. I crawled around on the floor for a while, seeing stars. I've never felt something so painful in my life, and I've had a kidney transplant. That was nothing compared to this. Story 15. My pelvis opened up to give birth to my child in about 6 hours. I thought my legs were going to shatter. The pain I felt after waking up from my endometriosis surgery felt like my insides had the absolute worst sunburn. Story 16. I tore my anterior cruciate ligament and meniscus, and they wanted to straighten my leg to get a good MRI. However, my leg did not want to straighten, so they had to force it. Story 17. It started with a compression wedge fracture in my thoracic area, T10, T12, that eventually caused the vertebrae to stack on top of each other without the cushioning cartilage between each vertebra from T10 to S1. Story 18. This probably isn't the worst because I've broken a few bones, but it's definitely the funniest. One time I rolled off a bed when I was about 7, and I landed on a spiky, star-shaped metal soccer participation trophy. Story 19. Having a wisdom tooth removed when you are not fully numbed and can feel it, then experiencing an infection and dry socket in that same area afterwards. Story 20. I had a backpack full of items and didn't see a small ditch in a field as I was walking. Luckily, I was with a few friends, although they thought I was exaggerating. I was in tears, unable to breathe properly without pain. I must have pulled something, because my back seized up and I lost all feeling from my tailbone to my shoulders. Time slowed down, and I crumpled to the floor onto my forearms and knees. I couldn't move for almost an hour. Felt like someone hit me with a taser, and when I finally could move, all I could do was slowly rotate to my side. I couldn't even lie flat because I couldn't get my backpack off. It was nearly another hour before I could get to my feet, and then I could barely walk. What was normally a 30-minute walk home took me about 2 hours. A friend rolled me a joint, and that was the only way I was able to get home. Story 21. Ingrown toenail removed without anesthetic. The toenail was cut from the top down to the cuticle with scissors and removed, with an infection present. Story 22. 58 hours of labor from the time my water broke included 2 hours of pushing, an episiotomy, and a forceps birth, all occurring after the epidural wore off. Story 23. Birth. My baby's head was large and pressed against my spine on the way down. It felt like someone was slowly breaking my spine, and I had no control. An ovarian cyst was frighteningly painful and caused me to faint in the emergency room, but it was not as bad as giving birth to my son. Story 24. Migraines, without a doubt. Feel as if the side of my face and inner ear are being stabbed with an ice pick. Story 25. Anal fissure. The pain is excruciating. I remember crying and saying I would not wish it on my worst enemy. Story 26. The second intrauterine device I received was difficult to insert because they couldn't open my cervix. They attempted for 45 minutes before giving up, prescribing me muscle relaxers, and asking me to return the following day. As I left, the obstetrician-gynecologist assured me, "Nothing else you experience will be that painful, not even childbirth." Great, I suppose. Story 27. Chemotherapy can lead to significant joint pain during recovery. I have experienced second-degree burns externally and third-degree burns internally from radiation for the same cancer. That was painful. However, seeing broken bones and complications from cesarean sections makes me feel fortunate. You all are amazing. Story 28. I had no idea what it was, but when I was a teenager, I experienced intense back pain that made it impossible for me to move or even breathe. It lasted all day and caused gut-wrenching discomfort. The pain was excruciating and affected every part of my body, knocking me out a few times and keeping me awake on other occasions. Thankfully, it never happened again for about 17 years. Story 29. Stomach ache. I have a high pain tolerance. I have even been stabbed. But nothing hurts like those stomach aches I had when I was a child. There was no adrenaline, just pain. Story 30. A spontaneously collapsed lung. I am a non-smoker and was sitting on my couch eating pizza, so I thought it was heartburn. Story 31. Dislocated knee for over 3 hours with the doctor tearing a tendon while failing to put it back in. It's grim. Story 32. I had a cyst on my sac that became infected. It was past the point where the doctor could numb it, so they had to drain it. Story 33. Abscess tooth. Then I had the bright idea of swishing a throat spray around in my mouth to numb the pain, which hit a nerve that caused pain everywhere. Story 34. When I was 8, I had 9 ulcers, and 3 of them were bleeding. Felt like something was eating my flesh from the inside. Story 35. I hurt my back and collapsed in pain at a gas station bathroom in upstate New York. Back pain is no joke. Story 36. I had my knee replaced. A significant part of the pain was from physical therapy. The physical therapist was very aggressive and pushed me. They helped me get back on my feet and return to work fairly quickly. Story 37. I had a cesarean section. For days after being released from the hospital, I was shaking and in immense pain. My body was very swollen. I was rushed back to the emergency room, where I was diagnosed with a severe uterine infection caused by trapped gas and blood. When they pressed on my abdomen, I nearly passed out from the pain. Story 38. I underwent ACL surgery and spent the night without pain medication. I also shattered my collarbone and went a few days without pain relief. The nerve damage caused sensations akin to boiling water down my back every 30 seconds. It was the most miserable experience, with migraines that felt 100 times worse. The pain was so intense that I would throw up every few minutes, and they lasted for days, leading to back spasms due to my body reacting so severely. It was absolutely awful. Story 39. I had a breast augmentation, and the incision was made along the bottom line of my areola so that it would blend in and not be visible. About a week after surgery, I developed a seroma, which is a pocket of fluid around the implant on the right side of my chest. I was in excruciating pain but had no idea what was happening at the time. I woke up at 4 a.m. with my shirt completely soaked. When I unwrapped the bandage on my chest, I realized that the incisions around my areola had ripped open. The seroma had gotten so large that it tore the incision open from the inside and burst out. Story 40. Having an infected wisdom tooth extracted while pregnant and unable to have anesthesia, with the site too swollen for Novocaine to work, was a difficult experience. The dentist had to put his knee on my shoulder to gain enough leverage to pull it out. I was in shock when it was over. Childbirth and a shattered ankle came next. Story 41. I got really sick and coughed so hard, probably in a weird position, that I broke 3 ribs. A year later, I got sick again and coughed so hard that I broke 2 more ribs on the other side. Yes, it still hurts sometimes. Story 42. When I was 9, I jumped off my basement stairs and didn't realize that my sibling or dog had knocked over some old glass decorations, which shattered all over the basement. I was home alone, so I had to pull shards of glass out of both feet. I remember crying for my mom with each piece I removed. When she got home, she took me to the emergency room. It was not a good day. I have been in a car accident, punched and kicked, broken some bones, and had appendicitis. That glass in my foot still haunts me. Story 43. Delivering twins. I did have an epidural, but it was starting to wear off, so I felt most of the first baby coming out. Baby B's cord fell out and she flipped head up. I felt the cesarean section. They started cutting before the medication knocked me out. Story 44. Swimmer's ear was so painful that I was begging for relief. But when my eardrum finally ruptured, it felt like pure bliss. Story 45. I had a bad root canal for which I was not given painkillers. Once the anesthesia wore off, I was in indescribable agony. I could feel the pressure of every beat of my heart coursing through my jaw and into my skull. I was a 26-year-old man crying on the couch at 3 a.m., trying not to scream, covered in bags of frozen vegetables. It took me multiple clinic visits the following day to get even just a few prescription-strength pain relievers, as they believed I was an addict due to my disheveled appearance and panicked behavior. I had another root canal about 10 years later, and the dentist who performed it was a genius. There was absolutely zero pain. Story 46. Back labor is incredibly intense. Usually, with contractions, there's a brief pause in pain, but with back labor, it is continuous. Story 47. There must be a significant connection between unmedicated labor and having a spinal herniation that did not move to the left, right, front, or back. It went up into my spine. The uncontrollable nerve twitching causing my body to repeatedly squeeze the hernia made me laugh hysterically in the emergency room waiting area. I felt like I was on the verge of losing my mind completely. Story 48. I am not sure which was worse, my worst migraines or the sciatica that left me unable to walk. Childbirth was a walk in the park compared to either of those. Story 49. I posted about this before, but when I was 14, I was riding my bike barefoot and caught my left foot in the spoke, tearing off my big toe. That was painful. Story 50. Back spasms lasted 3 days. I couldn't walk straight or sit or stand without feeling like something was grabbing and twisting my lower back muscles, and no pain relievers would help. What made me feel even worse was that I was visiting my best friend, who had chronic back pain from degenerative disc disease. I felt weak complaining about my back pain when I knew hers was much worse. Story 51. Abscess tooth. Even just moving your head causes intense pain. It easily surpasses broken bones, cuts, burns, and other injuries I have ever had. Story 52. I have had my lower back fused. I wouldn't wish that pain after the surgery even on my worst enemy. It hurt to do anything. Felt like my whole back could rip open at any time. Story 53. My wisdom teeth surgery was performed while I was awake, and I had all 4 removed at once. The doctor didn't numb me sufficiently in the lower teeth area, and he was moving so quickly that he extracted them without me being able to inform him that I could feel it. I could feel the nerves tearing, and it hurt so much that I almost vomited. The recovery felt extremely painful, and getting bone splinters in my gums was particularly uncomfortable. Story 54. Root canal treatment. I have genetically long canals. Even though I was under a lot of anesthesia, I basically passed out from the pain while trying to hold on to dear life. Good memories. Story 55. Labor pain, abscess tooth, gallbladder attack. I think it's a 3-way tie. How could I forget the facial nerve pain after a root canal? I honestly can't even face the memory of that pain. Story 56. I had a tooth pulled without anesthesia. I have never seen the whole world white out like that. It was definitely an experience. Story 57. Migraine. I experience them quite often, but there was one very specific incident. I had severe nausea and stabbing pain behind my eyes. I was crying because nothing seemed to help. All I wanted was to sleep, but I couldn't even do that because of the pain. Story 58. Needing a root canal while 20 weeks pregnant was challenging. The pain started on a Friday, but I couldn't get an appointment until Monday. The only pain reliever I could take was acetaminophen, but I was scared to because I was pregnant. I was very close to pulling the tooth out with my hands. I'm glad I didn't, but it was a terrible experience. Story 59. I had a bad tooth with an abscess. Felt like someone was slowly twisting a corkscrew into my upper jaw. My wife found me at 2 a.m., preparing to use a clean pair of pliers I had shaped to grab the tooth, getting ready to try to extract it myself. She searched through her medication stash and gave me a few tramadol tablets, which calmed the pain enough for me to get an emergency dentist appointment when they opened. I have broken bones before, but I have never felt pain like that. Story 60. Wisdom teeth can sometimes turn sideways, causing significant discomfort. For 3 months, it felt like I was chewing on a heart inside my mouth. I couldn't sleep well, even more than usual, and eating was a challenge. The pain from the teeth was unsettling, as there's little relief available. Since we use our teeth daily, the discomfort is unavoidable. Story 61. I had a ruptured lumbar disc pressing on my spinal cord, causing extreme pain 24 hours a day for 3 months until the surgery. I couldn't sit the entire time. I could only stand or lie down. I was completely drained mentally and physically by the time of the surgery. After the surgery, I did not need any pain medication because my pain tolerance was very high. I feel that I know what it's like to be subjected to torture for days on end, and I still shudder when I think about it. Story 62. Pancreatitis. I long to die. I have broken teeth against pavement, lost a finger in a motorcycle chain, and had 5 teeth become abscessed at the same time. But pancreatitis was worse than all of them combined. It was the first time I experienced a pain level of 10. Story 63. Sciatica, specifically sneezing and coughing due to a cold during a sciatica flare-up. Story 64. An abscessed tooth was unbearable. I was sobbing from the pain before I could get a root canal. Story 65. I have multiple damages to my spine, including herniated discs, cervicobrachial syndrome, shoulder impingement syndrome, and osteochondrosis of the cervical region, along with some other issues. It's just pain every day. Story 66. A ruptured ovarian cyst and getting my Nexplanon inserted because my previous OBGYN didn't bother to wait for the numbing agent to take effect. You shouldn't feel pain, but you'll feel some pressure. As it turns out, that was not true. Story 67. The suicide of my 2 stepsons and my husband occurred within just under 2 years of each other. Comedy, usually dark, serves as my therapy. Story 68. My body was trying to purge the poison after I purposely overdosed on pills in high school. The second most painful experience was my chest hurting so much after my dog died on the emergency room table on the 4th of July last year. Story 69. I had severe food poisoning during my second year of college. It was so bad that I couldn't even keep water down, and I became extremely dehydrated, causing my muscles to become very tense. I experienced intense pain from vomiting repeatedly. It got so bad that I called the campus emergency medical services because I couldn't make it back to my dorm room from the bathroom. It was an awful experience. Story 70. Surgery, I think. It felt like I was run over by several trucks, and my whole body was one giant bruise. My body was infected, and I had a fever, which probably contributed to it. I hadn't been in an accident. I was just sick, and they performed surgery on my stomach to see what was wrong. Story 71. I had a kidney stone that was 1 centimeter, by far the most painful thing I have experienced. It was so large that I couldn't pass it, and they couldn't guarantee that the ultrasound would break it up. So I chose to have it surgically removed. It was well worth the post-surgery pain. Story 72. One time, I fell off the city bus. The driver parked farther over than he usually did. So instead of stepping out onto the concrete, I stepped down into the soft earth. The inside of my foot touched my ankle. I collapsed and crawled on my hands and knees to the bench. I called my boss and he came to pick me up. About an hour later, it looked like I had a softball-sized swelling on my ankle. I went to the doctor and it was just a sprain. However, he said it would hurt more and take longer to heal than if I had broken it. I was in a hard cast for 8 weeks. Story 73. My hip surgery. I had a periacetabular osteotomy 8 years ago. I'm glad I did it, but that surgery was some of the worst pain I have ever experienced. Even worse than having my children, honestly. Story 74. Healing after my first seizure was challenging because I fell onto concrete. My face and head were injured. Story 75. I jammed the top part of my pinky finger in a door pushed by my friends, and my nail came off. Story 76. Well, I have had a 22-hour labor, appendicitis, uterine complications that caused a hysterectomy and bladder sling surgery, and horrendous migraines. However, what takes the cake is the gallbladder attacks. Nothing compares to that. Thankfully, I had it removed, and that was my most difficult surgery recovery. But I do not wish those experiences on anyone. Story 77. Surgery without anesthesia was an emergency. They attempted a local anesthetic, but for some reason, it wasn't effective. It was not a pleasant experience. Story 78. I had to get a tooth pulled and discovered that an infection was starting after they gave me the maximum amount of numbing. Yet I could still feel it. I decided to proceed because I wanted to avoid a round of antibiotics and a return visit. No regrets. Listening to music on my headphones helped me get through it. Story 79. Nerve damage, also known as Parsonage-Turner syndrome. I wanted them to say my arm was hurting so badly. I'm glad they didn't, but it still hurt. Story 80. I had a golf ball-sized gallstone stuck. I needed emergency surgery to remove my gallbladder. This occurred during the peak of the COVID-19 lockdown. Story 81. Getting my tube removed after my myringotomy surgery at age 6, a procedure to drain fluid from the ear. 20 years later, nothing compares. Story 82. Cluster headaches are my main issue, but in second place is a damaged tailbone. I can now predict when rain is approaching. Story 83. Torn anterior cruciate ligament. Torn medial collateral ligament. Hip surgery. Bruised tailbone. Punctured kidney. None of these. It is gout. Gout is hell. Story 84. A bungee strap S-hook popped back and hit me in the eye. My lens tore loose, and my eyeball filled with blood. I suffered a concussion and underwent eye surgery to implant a new artificial lens. I also had plastic surgery on my pupil to address paralysis. An amniotic membrane was attached to my eye along with a procurement lens to aid in corneal healing. I have to wear a bandage contact lens every day just to open my eye. For the past 14 years, I've used thousands of eye drops, and it still hurts every day. Story 85. Last December, my wisdom teeth became infected. It had happened before, but I received antibiotics. This time, it caused swollen, half-exposed cavities on the bottoms where they had partially come in, along with abscesses surrounding them. I tasted blood all day, my lymph nodes swelled, and my eyes felt like someone was stabbing them with ice picks. I was 23 at the time, so my wisdom teeth had come in a bit later. The dentist told me when I was 18 that I needed them removed before I turned 21, or I would have significant issues. I wish I had figured something out sooner. With insurance, which was decent through work, it still cost around $5,000 to have them removed, so that's why I put it off. I'm not one to cry during pain. I have tattoos in sensitive areas, like my hip bone, but I was up sobbing onto my cat's fur all night with a throbbing pain in my jaw. Felt like I couldn't breathe. No amount of ibuprofen helps when the pain gets that severe. You have to call for emergency surgery. The pain after having 4 teeth pulled during the procedure was surprisingly mild compared to the discomfort before. If you have this problem, ask your dentist about third-party payment plans they offer. The plan I used did not charge interest and was accessible even with low credit. I encourage everyone to get their wisdom teeth removed before it reaches this point because it's an incredibly helpless feeling. I was also able to find a place that only charged me $2,000 with insurance, but still, it's insane. $500 per tooth. I understand they have to make money and pay for materials, but this was just to pull the teeth and stitch me up. I guess it's the anesthesiologists and the anesthesia that costs the most. Story 86. Walking around a fire pit on the cinder blocks that surrounded it. One tipped and my hand went right into the fire. I was nearby a lake and ran to it. My hand was so hot that I had to move it around, or the water would get warm and start hurting. I developed a huge blister on my hand. Story 87. I am young and do not have much life experience, but I had a painful bike accident in Alaska. My bike slid on some grass before hitting dirt, sending me over the handlebars at over 10 miles per hour. I landed directly on my chest, which knocked the wind out of me. I was shocked by the animalistic scream that came from my mouth. The sound of someone screaming in pain while struggling to breathe is very strange. I had trouble walking for the rest of the day and remained sore for about a week. Amazingly, nothing was broken or cracked. Story 88. I get migraines, so I know what a bad headache is like. That said, I had a terrible headache one time. Felt like my brain was on fire, and I couldn't see. Story 89. I had an infection in my colon. At least that's the best they could determine after 20 hours in the emergency room, not counting the wait time. The pain was so severe that I thought I was dying and wished it would happen quickly. Mentally, I had already said all my goodbyes. Story 90. This post is ironic. I just burned my hand about 15 minutes ago. I have to say that it isn't as bad as the other accounts I've read. So I wish health and healing without pain for everyone who has gone or is going through an injury. Story 91. I crashed while skiing into rock boulders and broke 9 ribs. I had a helicopter ride to the hospital and spent 45 days there, including 28 days in the intensive care unit. I was on and off a ventilator and had a tracheotomy. I underwent several surgeries and experienced a near-death experience. Pain changes you significantly, but I am skiing again because I can't quit living. Story 92. I suffered a third-degree burn from KFC gravy on my arm, wrist, and hand. I had lied to my parents because I was only 14 and not allowed to work, so I had to hide it from them. Luckily, I was the youngest of 6 siblings. They were quite busy and didn't pay much attention to me. It took 6 months to heal, and I am now 61 years old and still experience post-traumatic stress disorder from it. Story 93. Experiencing pain during lower back surgery and knee issues for an entire year due to overstretching during a growth spurt required wearing knee braces for a full year. Story 94. I had my eardrums sliced open by an ear, nose, and throat doctor. I can't remember, but I'm pretty sure it's the only time I've ever passed out from pain. I then walked to my car and vomited before driving home. I've broken a few bones, ripped some ligaments, gotten tattoos, and had several piercings. This was by far the most painful experience I've ever gone through. Story 95. Kidney stone, definitely. After going to the emergency room and being sent home twice with just advice to take Tylenol, I returned a third time in tears from the pain. They finally performed a scan and found the kidney stone. I was hospitalized for 3 days and had to have it surgically removed. I later discovered through my medical records that I had sepsis, which explains why I felt so terrible. Thankfully, it has been 7 years since then, and I haven't had another one. Second would be giving birth. Yes, the kidney stone hurt more than childbirth. And third would be migraines. Story 96. I have hemophilia, a genetic blood clotting disorder. In middle school, I experienced a bleed in my psoas muscle. It was extremely painful, and I couldn't move my leg out of a knee-to-chest position. I was on morphine and hospitalized for 3 days to receive my factor VIII medication to stop the bleeding. It was absolute agony. If anyone out there knows any individuals with hemophilia, or has experienced a loved one going through a bleed, you know how much it hurts. Story 97. I tore a muscle in my side 2 summers ago, and I was out of commission for about a week and a half. I couldn't keep down solid food, so I mostly got by on root beer and sports drinks while eating what little I could. Story 98. In junior high, I jumped down some stairs and landed on the last step. How I didn't break it is beyond me. I nearly fainted. Story 99. I had pain in my stomach for a few days. The pain would wake me up at 4 a.m. and wouldn't stop for a couple of hours, no matter what I did. I took some medication, but it didn't help. I honestly felt hopeless. No matter how I positioned myself, nothing really helped. Just lying down in a fetal position. Story 100. My 6th kidney stone was too large to pass. They removed it in 6 pieces. I have broken bones, suffered concussions, severed a finger, and broken a hip after being hit by a truck. But honestly, that kidney stone was the worst. Story 101. I had the flu and needed to get an intravenous line. The doctor tried to insert it into a vein in my hand but ended up hitting my bone. I screamed very loudly. Story 102. When I tried to separate 2 dogs that were fighting, I had a fingertip bitten off. It was not her fault. I still love that dog 10 years later. It broke my heart that we had to rehome the other one. Story 103. I had to undergo reconstructive surgery on my face and nose. The pain was significantly worse than the original injury. I was concussed and a recovering addict, so I refused to take pain medication. Now, I experienced trigeminal neuralgia a couple of times a day. It's like being struck by lightning behind the eyes for a minute. Story 104. I was hit by an SUV, which broke my femur in 2 places. The section between the brakes shifted sideways. After the emergency medical technicians finished their standard discussions, they informed me that they could not administer morphine because it would interfere with the surgery. I had to endure a 20-minute ride without painkillers, feeling every bump intensely. Once at the hospital, the first thing they did was give me morphine. I then lay in the emergency room for 2 hours. During the COVID-19 pandemic, my best guess is that they had more urgent cases to attend to. All the nurses were understandably agitated, which made my hospital experience even worse. At one point, a nurse performed a nasal swab for COVID-19, and my nose began to bleed heavily, so she left. Each time a different nurse entered, she was alarmed to see me covered in blood. Story 105, Pilonidal cyst. Having the cyst was the worst pain I could have possibly imagined. When they had to insert a needle to numb it before draining, I honestly thought I was going to die. It was so awful. I have had 9 of them from ages 12 to 20. I am now 22 and finally had the surgery to remove the part of my tailbone on which they grow entirely. Story 106. Kidney stones feel like waking up with jagged rocks in your abdomen. An ear blockage nearly ruptured my eardrum, causing intense pain similar to being stabbed in the side of my head. Story 107. I slammed the tip of my left middle finger in a doorway out of anger. The nail was still intact, but I could see the tip of the finger bone. This incident ruined my enjoyment of gore, and now I have a slight phobia of doors. Story 108. I was kicked in the groin by a combative patient suffering from delirium due to acute alcohol withdrawal while assisting my colleagues in subduing him. He had ripped off his hospital gown and all the monitoring equipment and was wearing nothing but steel-toed boots. I blacked out for a few minutes due to the overwhelming pain. Story 109. I experienced extreme gut pain and couldn't talk or move. I just fainted. When I woke up, I was pale, according to my friend. My left hand fingers were stiff for a moment. To this day, I am still unsure what that was. Story 110. My ears were hurting badly while a plane was landing. I felt as if the inside of my ear was expanding and as if it might explode at any moment. I cried a lot because I had never experienced such pain in my life. It took a few hours for my ears to return to normal. Story 111. Every so often, someone asks a question like, what is the worst disease you could possibly have? One of the top answers is an autoimmune disorder. I have that. Another answer would be the menstrual cramps that made me turn pale and nearly faint. Story 112. I cut the bottom of my foot open on broken glass in a lake. The cut itself didn't hurt, but the 3-inch long needles going into the bottom of my foot and the feeling of the stitches were quite unpleasant. Story 113. Multiple infected intra-abdominal abscesses occurred after gallbladder removal. It took 1 week, 2 emergency room visits, a visit to the surgeon, a visit to my primary care physician, and 1 hospital stay before they finally believed I was in severe pain. I was prescribed antibiotics for 30 days and antifungals for 14 days. The abscesses had to be drained under computed tomography guidance. Story 114. It's a toss-up between a dry socket, a strangulated hernia, and a compartmentalized hemorrhage between my abdominal muscles and fat layer that slowly but incessantly tore my skin away from my muscles. All of this redefined my 10 for the question. On a scale of 1 to 10, how much pain are you in? I don't want to move that bar ever again. Story 115. I broke one of my kneecaps from a golf ball hit off a rock. For those wondering, I was still able to have 3 kids on 1 kneecap. Story 116. My vasovagal nerve reaction kicked in at the worst possible time. I have a peculiar but somewhat common condition where any time a needle pierces my skin, I faint for a few seconds, and my immune system goes into overdrive, giving me flu-like symptoms for a few hours. I went in for a regular checkup. The doctor noticed that I had missed a vaccination and asked if I wanted to take care of that while I was there. I agreed, and he left to send in a nurse. I warned the nurse that I black out after vaccinations, and she reassured me that her daughter has the same problem and that she knew how to handle it. She had me lie down before giving me the shot and afterward provided me with some juice, telling me to relax and watch television until I passed out and not to stand up until I had fully regained my vision and fine motor control. I thanked her and sat through 3 episodes of The Big Bang Theory. Nothing happened, so I thought I might have grown out of this and was probably fine. I got up and walked to the checkout counter, but I fainted without any warning. I fell forward, hit my chin on the counter, and then fell backward, landing directly on my head. The impact made such a loud noise that the doctor came running down the hall and accidentally stepped on my new glasses and my left hand. I woke up in the emergency room with a serious concussion, 3 broken fingers, a damaged pair of glasses, and every muscle in my neck and shoulders pulled. I still can't decide what hurt worse: the pain from the injury or the $1,500 they charged me to transport me to the emergency room on the other side of the building when it would have been faster to push my gurney down the hall. Story 117. Kidney stones. One time, I had kidney stones while undergoing a ventricular peritoneal shunt revision, which was overwhelmingly painful. Story 118. When the nurse was kneading my abdomen after my cesarean section, I mean it when I say that morphine couldn't touch that pain. Story 119. Migraines feel like someone pushing a red-hot poker through my eye and stirring my brain with it for hours. It is terrifying, and there is no relief. I just have to wait it out. Story 120. Skateboarding when I was a kid. I wore a long sleeve coat while lying on my stomach going downhill, holding the nose with both hands. My sleeves got caught under the wheels and pulled my hands down, ripping off all my fingernails except for my thumbs at the same time. I am 53 now and have never felt that kind of pain since. Story 121. When I was a child, I was riding with someone on the back wheel of their bicycle when my bare big toe got caught in the spokes and was severed as they kept pedaling. Honestly, as bad as that was, labor was worse. I am surprised there aren't more people here talking about labor pains. Story 122. Gout made it difficult for me to walk for 3 days, so I had to get around on my knees. Living alone, I couldn't cook and ended up having 1 microwaved frozen meal per day. I lost 15 pounds, so I suppose there was a silver lining. Story 123. A tube was stuck in my side after my motorcycle accident to remove air from a punctured lung. The accident was less painful. Story 124. Healing from cross-linking after running out of numbing drops has been a unique experience. I have never encountered anything like it before or since, and I would never want to endure that again, even for a minute. Story 125. Migraine for sure. I have had infected teeth and a staph infection rupture, but a migraine beats them all. Story 126. I passed a kidney stone in a public restroom at a theme park. They closed the bathroom and put security outside because I was screaming in the stall. 45 minutes later, I had a beer and a cigarette, and a lady gave me 2 Vicodin from her purse. I felt no pain and passed out on the benches outside the mini coaster. Security let me be while my family played. They just asked me to wear sunglasses so it wasn't obvious I was asleep. Those guys were amazing. Story 127. As someone who has undergone radiation for cervical cancer and has endometriosis, I have experienced endometriosis cramps and IUD insertion. Story 128. Until now, I have experienced period cramps and accidentally burned myself with friction, requiring the use of a spray. Story 129. Because it is recent, I had a cyst on my back drained. When I went back for a checkup, they removed the packing and took a look. There was still some fluid, so they repacked it without any medication to alleviate the pain. Felt like a hot poker slowly being pushed into my back. Story 130. The 3 most painful experiences for me were: at 14, I had a urinary catheter temporarily inserted during a bladder reconstruction surgery. I asked the nurses if it would hurt, and they assured me, "Oh no, it just feels like a tug. We do them in outpatients as it's such a minor procedure." Well, when the day came, I actually screamed. At 19, I found a lump in my genital area, which I initially thought was thrush. It became painful, so I tried applying antifungal cream. When that didn't improve the situation, I attempted to insert a pessary. But by that point, the lump had increased in size and I was in agony. My genital area felt on fire. I called for emergency medical assistance and got an appointment for the next day. By then, one side had swollen to about twice its normal size. It was burning and painful to move or sit down. I'm a wheelchair user, so just imagine. When I arrived at the appointment, I was desperate for the doctor to take a look. I got on the examination table and removed my trousers and underwear. I will never forget the look on that doctor's face. It turned out it wasn't thrush. It was a Bartholin's cyst. This has actually happened to me twice. When I was 25, I had a urinary tract infection that escalated to a kidney infection. I had been to the emergency room a week earlier with symptoms of a UTI and was prescribed antibiotics. Since UTIs are a regular occurrence for me, I wasn't too worried because I had the antibiotics. I took them and completed the course. 2 days later, while sitting at my desk at work, I just didn't feel right. I put it down to tiredness and made myself a strong tea, taking some painkillers. I felt okay for a bit, but then I started feeling really unwell. My boss noticed I was getting warm and sweaty, and I could also feel back pain. I was working on an important project, so I was reluctant to leave early. However, the back pain became unbearable, so I confided in my boss and my team, who insisted I go home. Given my medical history, I decided to go straight to my general practitioner. He took one look at me and sent me back to the emergency room with a priority letter, since I have one kidney. By this point, the pain was excruciating. Once at the hospital, I struggled to get my words out because of the intensity of the pain. I then had to wait 5 hours. The letter didn't mean anything to them. It's all a bit of a blur, but I remember clutching the wall and crying for the entire 5 hours I was in the waiting area. Eventually, they admitted me, thank God. I will never forget the relief I felt when they put in an intravenous line and administered pain relief. I had never felt such relief in my life. I wouldn't wish this ordeal on my worst enemy. Story 131. Breastfeeding. Honestly, the birth was about 7.5 out of 10 on the pain scale, but breastfeeding was 12 out of 10 in terms of pain. No one informed me. Story 132. I had a drainage tube in my abdomen after surgery. Coming off the anesthesia, they gave me morphine and acetaminophen, but it didn't help. They then administered ibuprofen. My pain only decreased from a 10 to a 9 on the pain scale. Once they removed the tube, the pain was gone. As a side note, due to gastric bypass surgery, I am not supposed to take ibuprofen, and they were hesitant to give it to me. Story 133. Double jaw surgery and the weeks of recovery afterward. My parents, understandably, did not want me taking painkillers and kept me on a constant rotation of ibuprofen and acetaminophen, but it did not help. Story 134. Possibly when I crushed a nerve in my leg and couldn't get up even to use the bathroom for 2 days. I could not move and held it in. Or when I received an injection into a tiny space in my foot, and it crystallized. I'm not sure how I got home other than by sheer willpower because all touch was agony. I had to take off my shoe and sock and hop while resting my knee on things. Or some of the cluster headaches. Dear Lord, the serious injuries didn't hurt as much at first. My broken shoulder was really bad, but the pain built up over hours. Story 135. A very unpleasant motorcycle crash resulted in a collapsed lung and multiple broken bones, including a double compound fracture of my right arm. It was painful, but now I have interesting scars and pieces of metal in my arm, so I suppose that's something to appreciate. Story 136. First bowel movement on day 1 of my period with endometriosis. I have given birth twice with no pain relief. That experience was nothing compared to this. Story 137. I have experienced a few significant challenges. I have been septic twice, and the total body pain felt as if my body was literally dying. It was really bad. My divorce and having my children given to the other parent absolutely destroyed me, and I still experience physical pain, deep chest pains related to this. Currently, I am recovering from my 3rd back surgery, which required a lumbar fusion. You may be thinking that the surgery itself caused the pain, but you would be mistaken. The herniated disc that debilitated me to the point where I could not walk, along with the nerve pain in my entire right leg, may be the worst pain I have ever experienced. On the day of the surgery, I was so overwhelmed that I couldn't even register myself. They had to come out to me because I was curled up on the floor, crying uncontrollably. They had to bring a gurney to take me back. Story 138. Waking up the morning after ankle surgery, I couldn't stomach what they gave me post-operation, so I couldn't take any more that day. Their effectiveness ran out overnight, and I was in so much pain it was all that existed in my life. Getting rid of that pain was the only thing that mattered. I cared about nothing else. My wife called the surgeon at 6 a.m., and she quickly prescribed some stronger medication. She told us that managing pain was harder than preventing it. I got heavily sedated and was feeling much better by noon. I couldn't thank my surgeon enough for helping me so early in the morning. She said it was no problem. I was one of the few who react badly to post-operative medications, and that kind of early call is part of the job. Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.